Remember when a movie about pottery, ghosts, and unresolved emotional trauma became the biggest thing on the planet? In 1990, Ghost floated into theaters from Paramount Pictures, directed by Jerry Zucker, and it starred Patrick Swayze at peak vulnerability, Demi Moore at peak emotional precision, Whoopi Goldberg stealing every frame she touched, and Tony Goldwyn playing a villain so convincing that waitresses refused to serve him for years. It became the highest-grossing film of 1990. It won Whoopi an Oscar, the first Black woman to take home that award in over 50 years. It resurrected a 35-year-old love song, and it permanently wired wet clay into our collective romantic imagination. This wasn't just a movie. It was an emotional rewiring. And today, we're counting down 15 weird and wild facts about Ghost. From casting near misses and audition breakdowns to demon sounds that still haunt your nightmares. Stick around for number 1, because that's about the audition that almost didn't happen and the grief that made it unforgettable. Now, let's step into the light. 15. The spoof king who made America ugly cry. Before Ghost, Jerry Zucker's biggest dramatic moment was Leslie Nielsen fighting a runaway hot dog. Not exactly Oscar bait. Zucker was one-third of the legendary Swayze trio, the maniacs behind Airplane and The Naked Gun, whose entire career was built on mocking sincerity. So when he signed on to direct a romantic supernatural thriller about love, loss, and the afterlife, Hollywood collectively spit out its coffee. Paramount executives were quietly terrified. The script was a tonal tightrope, part thriller, part love story, part meditation on death, and their new director's instinct was to look for the joke. But Zucker had an epiphany that changed everything. Comedy and drama run on the same clock. The pause before a laugh is the same pause before a tear. So he played it completely straight. No winks, no irony, just raw emotion calibrated with the same precision he once used for slapstick. The result was a movie so sincere it made the whole planet cry, directed by a guy famous for rubber chickens and fart jokes. Turns out if you can make people laugh, you already know exactly where the heart is. 14. Bruce Willis passed on playing dead, then did it anyway. In 1990, Hollywood had a romantic fantasy. Bruce Willis and Demi Moore, married in real life, starring together in a supernatural love story. Studios were practically drooling, but Bruce wanted out before the table read. His problem was that the character was dead. No fists, no explosions, just floating around watching stuff happen. In 1990, Willis was laser-focused on building the John McClane brand, a wisecracking tough guy, not a weepy spirit boyfriend. So he passed hard. That rejection cleared the runway for Patrick Swayze, who brought something Willis never would have, vulnerability without weakness. Where Bruce would have gone cynical, Swayze went tender. 9 years later, Willis starred in The Sixth Sense playing a guy who, spoiler alert, was dead the whole time. The movie made over $670 million worldwide. Turns out audiences were perfectly happy following a Ghost if the story delivered. Willis later admitted he regretted passing on Ghost, saying he didn't see what the film could be at the time. Hollywood speak, for I left $100 million on the table, and my wife kept the receipt. 13. Crocodile Dundee almost haunted Demi Moore.
Picture the pottery scene.
Demi Moore at the wheel, unchained melody swelling, and behind her, Paul Hogan cracking wise about the afterlife while clay splatters everywhere.
That almost happened.
When Ghost was making the rounds in Hollywood, some executives imagined a more comedic take and naturally gravitated toward the guy who fought crocodiles with a knife. Paul Hogan was riding a massive wave in the late 80s, charming, rugged, always winking at the camera. Instead of Swayze's aching vulnerability, you'd have gotten Aussie swagger. Instead of quiet heartbreak, you'd be waiting for the punchline. Thankfully, Hogan said no. He felt the role's emotional depth didn't match his comedic persona, so he left the weeping to someone else. 12. Demi Moore's restraint was the secret weapon. In the late 80s, movie grief had one setting: maximum volume. Shaking, sobbing, mascara running down faces like a Tim Burton nightmare. Demi Moore walked into Ghost and threw that entire playbook in the trash. Zucker needed an emotional anchor, someone who could sell devastating grief without tipping the movie into melodrama. Moore delivered something critics would praise for decades. Restraint. She didn't wail. She didn't collapse. She played Molly's heartbreak with a stillness that felt almost uncomfortable, like eavesdropping on someone's worst moment. That subtlety allowed Zucker to hold the camera on her longer than usual. No cutaways, no distractions, just quiet devastation filling the frame. The final shot proves it. As Sam fades into the light, the camera stays locked on Molly's face. No theatrics, just a woman watching the love of her life disappear forever. 11. Those demons were literally screaming babies. The shadow demons in Ghost have barely any screen time, but that sound moved into your brain rent-free and never left. Sound designer Walter Murch didn't want a generic monster roar. He wanted the audio equivalent of damnation, something that would punch your nervous system in the throat. His solution was crying babies. Murch slowed them way down, dropped the pitch until those high-pitched wails became deep guttural moans, then played them backwards. Here's why that works. Humans instinctively react to the sound of a baby crying. But when that sound is reversed and distorted, it becomes deeply disorienting. You can't identify it, and you can't rationalize it. All you feel is dread, and you don't know why. You could cover your eyes when the shadows burst through the walls, but it didn't matter. The sound still got you. You didn't need to see hell. You could hear it coming. 10. Patrick Swayze wasn't allowed to breathe. Being a ghost looks romantic on screen, but behind the scenes it meant standing in a meat locker trying not to shiver. Zucker insisted ghosts appear completely ethereal. No foggy exhales, no warmth, no biological signs of life. They were filming in New York during winter, so the crew declared war on physics. They cranked the AC until sets felt like industrial freezers. Crew members waddled around in parkas while Swayze stood in a thin shirt trying to look ethereal instead of hypothermic. And even then, some breath still snuck through. In 1990, you couldn't click remove breath in post. Every visible puff had to be painstakingly erased frame by frame. One visible breath in the subway scene and suddenly Sam Wheat isn't a tragic ghost. He's just a cold guy standing weird. And here's the beautiful irony. They went through all that effort to make sure Swayze never looked like he was breathing, and then the pottery scene became the most breathless moment in the entire film. 9. That penny scene hit harder than a billion-dollar CGI spectacle. When Sam needs to prove to Molly that he's really there, he makes a penny float up the door. That wasn't a slick digital effect. Ghost was made before modern CGI took over Hollywood, so everything had to feel grounded, physical, and real. On screen, the penny rises slowly, trembling, struggling. It's not a magic trick. It's effort. Moving a small piece of copper isn't a party trick in the world of this film. It's a Herculean act of will. You feel Sam pushing against the laws of physics just to reach the woman he loves. And because it's a real penny on a real door in a real New York apartment, your brain doesn't question it. Molly believes it, and so do you. One of the most emotionally devastating scenes of our childhood wasn't rendered on a server farm. It was simple, small, and earned. 8. The scariest thing in Ghost was a very tired man on public transit. The shadow demons got all the nightmares, but Vincent Schiavelli lurking in a subway station is the image that actually followed you home. That face, gaunt, hollow-eyed, looking like he hadn't slept since the Eisenhower administration. His subway ghost didn't play evil. He played tragic. A spirit so worn down by his own existence that hostility was all he had left. But this hostile stranger becomes an unlikely teacher, showing Sam how to interact with the physical world, how to push, focus, and make the living feel him. Without that encounter, Sam has no way to protect Molly. The subway ghost doesn't just scare us. He unlocks the entire third act. He's not a villain. He's a warning, a spirit who never moved on, stuck replaying the same anger in the same tunnels forever. He shows Sam and us what happens when you can't let go. 7. The pottery scene wasn't an accident. Every Gen Zer knows the pottery scene. Unchained melody playing, Swayze's hands over Moore's, clay spinning, hearts melting, and that moment where the pot collapses and everything gets messy and real. For decades, The story circulated that the clay collapsed unexpectedly, that Swayze and Moore improvised, and Zucker kept the cameras rolling. It's a perfect Hollywood legend, but it's not true. The collapse was planned, scripted, and rehearsed. Zucker wanted the moment where perfection fails, where the scene pivots from control to connection. But here's what is true. Demi Moore actually learned pottery. She trained for weeks so the camera could stay close without breaking the spell. The lens could glide from her face to her hands and back in one smooth motion. The laughter, the mess, the playfulness, none of it was chaos. It was carefully orchestrated chaos, which honestly makes it more impressive, not less. 6. Tony Goldwyn played the villain so well, waitresses refused to serve him.
Carl Brunner wasn't your standard movie bad guy.
No mask, no cackling. He was something far worse, your best friend, your business partner. And apparently that betrayal didn't stay on screen. Goldwyn described how strangers treated him like Carl Brunner had followed him into real life. Restaurant servers would glare, service would slow, and in one story, he's told repeatedly, a waitress flat out refused to take his order because of what his character did to Patrick Swayze. Carl was the leftover nightmare of the greed is good decade. Clean cut, fake sincere, smiling while stabbing you in the back. Goldwyn eventually broke the curse, most famously as the complicated President Fitz on Scandal. But for a whole generation, he'll always be the guy who betrayed Sam Wheat. And if strangers were still giving him the cold shoulder years later, that's not a complaint. That's the highest compliment an actor can get. 5. Ditto had no business being that romantic. Quick, name the most romantic line in cinema history.
You complete me.
As you wish. How about Ditto? Screenwriter Bruce Joel Rubin has talked about how hard it is not to go big in the final act. The instinct is to write a speech, something sweeping and quotable. Ditto felt like a cop-out, too small, too casual. But then the team realized what made it perfect. Sam Wheat wasn't a feelings guy. Buttoned up, emotionally armored in that very specific late-80s way. Saying I love you out loud probably made him uncomfortable. So Ditto wasn't laziness. It was him, his shorthand, his way of saying everything without actually saying anything. By establishing it early, the film planted a verbal fingerprint. When Molly hears that word through Oda Mae's mouth, she doesn't need DNA evidence. She knows. Then comes the knockout punch. At the very end, Sam finally says the full words. I love you. And Molly answers, with the roles reversed. She's learned his language, and she's ready to let him go. 4. Patrick Swayze fought for Whoopi and changed the movie forever. When it came to casting Oda Mae Brown, the studio hesitated. Whoopi Goldberg wasn't the obvious choice for a big supernatural romance. In 1990, Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with her in blockbuster movies. Swayze disagreed loudly. He personally pushed for Goldberg, believing she was the only one who could make Oda Mae feel real instead of cartoonish. He'd loved her grounded cynicism, the dry skeptical energy that could sell a scam artist turned real psychic without tipping into parody. This was Patrick Swayze fresh off Dirty Dancing. When he spoke, people listened. Eventually the studio did too, and that chemistry was instant. 3. Whoopi's Oscar win was 50 years in the making. When Whoopi Goldberg's name was called at the 1991 Oscars, people didn't just clap. They exhaled. The last Black woman to win an acting Oscar was Hattie McDaniel for Gone with the Wind. Then nothing. 51 years of silence. So when Whoopi took that stage, it wasn't a moment. It was a finally. And she did it playing a character who could have been completely disposable. On the page, Oda Mae reads like comic relief. In lesser hands, she's a one-note punchline who exits stage left and gets forgotten. Whoopi turned her into the movie's oxygen supply. Without Oda Mae's timing, audiences would have drowned in Ghost's weight. But the real magic was knowing when to stop being funny. In that scene where Sam inhabits Oda Mae's body to dance with Molly one last time, Whoopi doesn't play it for laughs. Her posture changes, her energy softens, and Sam's longing lives behind her face. That's a masterclass. 2. A 35-year-old song became the hottest track of 1990. Before Ghost, Unchained Melody was a beloved classic living on oldies stations and slow dances at weddings. Then a pottery wheel started spinning, and that old song found new life in a way few tracks ever do. The sync was genius. That low, haunting bass line starts just as the wheel begins to turn. As the pot rises, so does the music. The movie doesn't show you romance. It wires it directly into your nervous system. After Ghost, the Righteous Brothers' 1965 recording climbed back into the Billboard Hot 100 at number 13, while a newly recorded 1990 version hit number 19, making them the first act ever to have two versions of the same song in the top 20 simultaneously. And overnight, it became the ultimate Gen X karaoke trap. Everyone thought they could hit those notes. Almost no one could. Thousands of bar patrons suffered. It was a terrible time. 1. Patrick Swayze won the role by falling apart. The most important audition almost never happened because Zucker wasn't sold on Swayze. Fresh off Roadhouse and Dirty Dancing, he had a reputation as an action star and heartthrob. Zucker was making a supernatural love story and wanted soft, soulful, someone who could carry vulnerability, not just choreography. But Swayze was drawn to the story's heart, the love and loss at its center. He asked to read for the part, chose the most emotionally powerful scenes in the script, and the room reacted. People were moved. By the time he finished, Zucker knew he'd been wrong. But the emotional weight didn't stop at the audition. Filming Ghost stirred up feelings Swayze hadn't expected. Seeing a plaster dummy used to represent his on-screen body took him back to the shock of his father's funeral in 1982. The grief he thought he'd processed came rushing back, and that unresolved pain bled into his performance. That's why Sam Wheat doesn't feel like a movie ghost. He feels heavy, like a soul struggling to let go. The longing in Swayze's eyes during those final scenes wasn't manufactured for the camera. It came from somewhere real. This is why Ghost still hits different. A comedy director who made America sob. A tough guy who taught us vulnerability. A supporting character who held the movie together and made Oscar history doing it. 35 years later, the effects still work, the music still wrecks us, and that final goodbye still lands like a freight train to the chest. Which fact surprised you most? Drop it in the comments. Until next time, this is Remember When.